a death sentence, or a brutal cure. In the ancient world, when people fell severely ill, broke a bone, or suffered a mental breakdown, it didn't just mean a trip to a doctor. It meant submitting their bodies to absolute, agonizing rituals, terrifying surgeries without anesthesia, or relying entirely on the cold mathematics of tribal survival. Before modern medicine, the community either became a life support system, a torturer, or an executioner. Today we are looking at the direct, undeniable archaeological proof of what ancient humans did with people who were sick, disabled, or contagious. Our first concrete piece of proof comes from the Zagros Mountains in Iraq, at a prehistoric site known as the Shanidar cave. In 1957, anthropologists excavated the 45,000-year-old skeletal remains of an adult Neanderthal male catalogued as Shanidar 1. When scientists examined his bones under modern forensic equipment, they discovered a horror show of physical trauma. At a young age, Shanidar 1 had suffered a massive, crushing blow to the left side of his skull, leaving him completely blind in one eye. The trauma severely damaged his central nervous system, causing his right arm to completely wither away and fracture. The injuries were so severe that his own tribe had to naturally or surgically amputate his right forearm at the elbow to save his life. He also suffered from a fractured right foot that gave him a severe, permanent limp, acute hearing loss from bony growths in his ear canals, and an advanced degenerative bone condition. By all laws of nature, this man should have died within days. He could not hunt, he could not run from predators, and he could not gather food. Yet, the bone analysis proved every single one of his injuries had completely healed, and he lived to be nearly 50 years old. For decades, his tribe manually fed him, defended him from predators, and carried him through seasonal migrations. This is absolute proof of deep evolutionary psychology. Early hominids possessed intense empathy and social solidarity when dealing with people who were sick. But if the illness was internal, like severe head trauma from warfare, epilepsy, migraines, or violent psychological unraveling, ancient humans turned to a brutal surgical practice called trepanation. Archaeologists have dug up over 1,500 prehistoric skulls across the globe, dating back over 10,000 years, featuring a terrifying commonality: a perfectly round or cross-hatched hole, physically carved or drilled right into the living bone. At one burial site in France, a staggering 40 out of 120 skulls found featured these intentional surgical windows. Primitive medicine men did not understand viruses, tumors, or chemical imbalances. When people were sick with seizures or acting possessed, the tribe believed an evil spirit or a demon was trapped inside the patient's head. To cure them, the shaman would use a sharp piece of obsidian glass, a copper instrument, or a jagged flint stone to slowly scrape, saw, and cut through the scalp and skull of the fully conscious adult. They literally carved an escape hatch for the demon. The physical mechanics of this surgery were brutal. Shamans would use distinct methods, including rectangular intersecting cuts made with a ceremonial knife called a tumi, or drilling a circle of closely spaced holes and then chiseling the bone out between them. The most shocking part of this medical history is the survival rate. By analyzing bone remodeling and smooth, healed edges under microscopes, scientists proved that ancient Peruvian surgeons perfected this neurosurgery over centuries. Between 400 and 200 BCE, the survival rate was only 40%. But by the peak of the Incan Empire, the survival rate skyrocketed to over 80%. Countless adults actually survived this agonizing skull drilling process, living for years with a literal hole in their head, completely outperforming Western field doctors from the American Civil War who worked centuries later. However, when resource mathematics became too brutal, survival instincts completely overrode compassion. In mobile, nomadic, hunter-gatherer tribes, if people were sick with a highly contagious disease or suffered an illness during a severe famine or a freezing winter, they became an existential threat to the entire group. If the sick person could no longer walk or keep up with the tribe's pace, the group simply could not stop. Historical and ethnographic records show that tribes would perform a quick spiritual ritual, hand the sick person a final piece of meat or a small container of water, and simply walk away. They abandoned them on the freezing trail to die of exposure or be consumed alive by wild predators. It was cold, calculated, and necessary to prevent the entire lineage from dying. We like to believe that modern society is completely disconnected from these raw, primitive instincts. We think our modern hospitals and complex healthcare networks make us entirely civilized and rational. But the deep, biological tribal programming to protect our vulnerable, or completely alienate, quarantine, and abandon those we deem a threat to our collective resources, is the exact same hardware running in our brains today. So the next time you see someone care for a sick loved one, or watch society debate who deserves access to medical care, remember the dark history running through your veins. Realize that underneath our modern medical technology, we are still running on the exact same prehistoric coding. We are still the same primitive creatures, holding a stone drill, trying to decide whether to nurse the wounded or leave them behind in the dark. Subscribe for more raw historical facts and dark psychology.